And we're live. Welcome everybody to your favorite, right off the bat, favorite weekly series, Grace Under Pressure, where we're interviewing some royal consorts from around the known world, starting off with some of our favorite duchesses. This week is Duchess Inga, the Unfettered. After this, we'll be taking a little bit of a break. We're going to be coming back, new day, new time. Let's go on. Let's meet our hosts.
She doesn't go by the Unfettered anymore, but we'll get back to that later, Joel. First of all, welcome this week and every week to Sir Joel, who, it has come to my attention, is cheerfully accepting a lot of abuse from me. But as anybody who knows me will know, that is how I show affection. And if Joel would like to, at this point, declare that I have injured him, I will make amends to his tender spirit. Joel, how are you feeling today?
Full of love and whimsy and Christmas spirit, holiday spirit.
I will do my best to crush that in an hour, but I can't guarantee results. Like, I'm taking there's a lot of variables at play here. So Joel started in the SCA 16 years ago and apparently is still interested in doing these interviews, which is great. And he lives in Callantyre now, and it has been in a lot of other kingdoms. He's a bit of a dilettante in that way. He was knighted in 2018 and is blessed to have the love and admiration of his lady consort, Agnella, which we all feel for her. And so the fun fact for Joel this week is that he was once viciously attacked by an animal at a petting zoo. And Joel, you do understand when they said petting, they meant like just stroking their fur, not the kind of petting that the nuns would have warned you about, right?
No, like it was a legitimate thing. Like it was like it attacked me, and I was being very nice and gentle. It's reminiscent of our friendship, actually, where I'm being very nice and everything, and I get attacked. And
well, I've never spit on you like that alpaca did. Now, I mean, these are camelids. That's what they do, is they spit on things. So it's sort of like the story about the picking up the scorpion and putting it in your pocket and getting stung. So just saying, you know.
It was a vicious,
avoid that end of the alpaca. Okay, all right.
Horrible, unwarranted attack that I'm still traumatized for. Scott's Bluff Zoo, everybody, look out for it. All right, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and my friend, my primary tormentor, Duchess Dagmar of Antir. Her first reign was as a princess of Sinagua in the West, and she has since gone on to have two reigns in Antir with her husband and consort, Dork.
Did you just call it Dork?
Yeah, I did that. We are not off to a hot start this week.
Jokes
we're gonna make up for this one. I promise. It's gonna be. We're gonna get on with this. Inga's gonna kill it. It's gonna be amazing. Duke Thorin Yalson. So this week's fun fact about her, Grace, is that she secretly loves watching squirrels raid her mom's bird feeders.
I do. I know you're supposed to not want the squirrels in the bird feeders, but I kind of cheer them on just a little bit. So, and as always, we would like to extend a special thank you to Ashaxi and Rifkin for hosting Grace Under Pressure on the Sisters Interview Network. The work that you're doing to record SCA history for both posterity and also just for the interest of anyone who wants to learn more about other kingdoms. It's really incredible, and we appreciate so much what you do. And now, Joel, would you please provide a flowery, lengthy introduction of our guest?
Oh, I absolutely will. Now, hold on. I need to. This week we are joined by Duchess Inga of Avacal, but she really belongs to Antir. Next question.
That's all we wrote.
That's awesome. That's beautiful, short, succinct. I love it. Very nice. Very nice.
Inga has done so many things, it's almost difficult to list them all. And I encourage you to just go look at our OP listing. It's fine. Think of an SCA award, go look and see if she has it. That's really all you need to know. So, but in reality, for those who may not know, Avacal, the kingdom where Inga currently lives and has lived, it used to be a principality of Antir. And so we do have a lot of shared history between our two groups, and peerages and reigns and all of the above. So I'm going to ask you about your SCA origins, Inga, but then we're going to dive straight into the good stuff. So if you can tell us a little bit about what brought you to the SCA, we'll go through some embarrassing pictures and yeah.
Wonderful. Well, for anyone who saw my interview with Rifkin previously, I talked about my start in the LARP world, and so I actually got introduced to the SCA because of a bunch of really amazing people that I knew that were also LARPers. And there's a truly noteworthy LARP picture that Dagmar will be able to share in a moment. But my relation with the SCA was kind of rocky. When I first ran into the SCA, they were in the park, the standard story that everybody tells. I went to the park and there was people doing medieval things, and I went, ooh, and I went over to check it out. And there was one of the main fellows I went to talk to, and I confess I went and talked to him because he looked a little like Thor, tall and blonde. He was wearing shiny armor, it was good. And I started chatting with him, and he was like, oh yes, telling me all about him. I thought, this is brilliant, because I grew up in a household where history was everything, where my mom was a huge historian, especially English history, but also really big into genealogy and all of that. So history was a big part of my sort of foundation. And so I was really excited about getting to take that into something that was a hobby base. I have a degree in medieval art history, and so it was very natural for me. And so I'm chatting with this fellow, and I said, okay, this is awesome. The fighting is very cool. And he said, oh yeah, we don't let women fight. And I went, okay, so bye, and I walked away. And I didn't come back for 10 years.
What year was that, Inga?
I'm sorry?
What year was that?
So I ran into the SCA, would have been in, it was right after I was in high school. So I was 19. So it would have been 87, yeah. 88, which tells you all how old I am. I'm very old.
But also because my husband, who's old as rocks, also much like us, but older, he's an older rock than the two of us. He talks about when women weren't allowed to fight, and which just floors me, because of course I was in high school also. So the idea that the SCA would have been that exclusive and limited and restricted is really foreign to us.
Well, it is. And I think a lot of people forget that the SCA didn't always make space for people, regardless of their gender or their ability, right? I mean, there was a lot of sexism and ableism that happened in the SCA. I'm not saying that we're perfect at that yet, but we've made huge ground, huge strides. And now, to be clear, at that point in time, in fact, the SCA had allowed women. We were just at the start of women being allowed to fight, but there was, and anybody who was around at that time can tell you, there was a lot of people who didn't like that. And so their version of what the SCA was and the message they sent out did not make space for that. So I walked, like I said, I walked away, and that taught me two things. First of all, ask more than one person, but also the power of what we say to someone who's new. Yeah. So when someone approaches you with like big stars in their eyes and they're all ooh and ah about the SCA, for the love of everything that is holy, please do not stomp on that. And a lot of people, in their pursuit of the passion they love about the SCA, when their reaction to people's expression of loving the SCA sometimes actually completely crushes it. And it was a lesson I've never forgotten. I've always tried to be, I'm not saying I'm perfect by any stretch, but I've always tried to be incredibly careful with newcomers, because I think it is so easy. Like I said, I came back, it took 10 years before I came back. And I often think of what kind of a fighter would I be today if I had started then instead of in my 30s, because I was 30 when I took up fighting. If I'd started at 19, yeah. Anyways, but the power of that, right? Of that thoughtless moment of where, I mean, he didn't even, it's not like he went on a giant rant about, women had no place. He just said, oh, women aren't allowed to fight. And it was just this off the cuff comment. And I literally in that moment turned around and walked away. And so I think, like I said, I've always clung to that memory. And then what brought me back is, like I said, I was part of LARPing, and I had all these guys that I used to LARP with, and they just started coming out less and less often. And so we'd have some kind of big LARP event, and like I LARPed every single weekend. As hardcore as I'm known to be in the SCA, I was as hardcore in LARPing. I played vampire based games, I played werewolf based games, I played medieval like D&D games, I played one that was called Fallen Angels. We particularly Fallen Angels. Like I was in with all of the everything. And these guys they were some of my favorite people to play with, and they just started not coming out. So I finally asked them, like, where are you going that is better than this? And they said, oh, we're going to the SCA. And I said, so that's better? And they said, well, it's different and it depends on what you want. And I went, and after the first couple, and that was of course, my first question said, oh, that place where women can't fight. And my Bernard of the Wild, who was my household father after that, said, that's not true. And then he asked me a few questions to sort of figure out who it was. And he goes, oh, that guy's an ass. But you don't know, like newcomers they don't always run into your chatelaine. They sometimes run into the ass, right? And so anyways, so they of course then completely reassured me, and they're like, if you want to get into armor, trust me, we will put you in armor. It's all good. And I went to like 1 or 2 events, and then I was in, and I've always just, Dagmar, you know me well enough. I do nothing by half measures. And so I was as into that as I was into LARPs. And I just walked away from LARPs, and it was a lot of my LARP friends are still a little bit sort of like, oh, I guess we're not as good as the SE. I'm like, just different. That's all.
Different. That's right.
Yep, absolutely.
I want to put down a little bit of a soapbox here, because you touched on something that is actually a pet peeve of mine in the SCA, and it's something that really bears repeating, and that is experienced players or people that have been playing this for a while owe it to the newcomers to be as open as possible. I see so many people that are jaded in the SCA that rub that off immediately on people, and it's getting bad online now too, especially as we do things in a virtual setting. If someone shows up and they're really new and excited, even if that's in your new Facebook group or wherever it is, encourage them. Don't be the person that's like, oh no, you can't wear that in an event, or just encourage them. Keep that little flame alive. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox. That's a pet peeve of mine.
Joel, that's a great comment. Yeah. Is there an echo on your end or just on my end, you guys?
I think it's just on your end.
Okay, great. I will say that, first of all, I agree absolutely that you should be encouraging, and I can see in your SCA experiences and what you do, Inga, that you really embrace that. I will say that the one thing I am absolutely fearless about, because being a Duchess means I have social capital to burn, is when I meet somebody new and there's something about them, I try to dive in right away and find out if they're a white supremacist. And I don't take any issue with that. And if I'm wrong, I will take the hit socially. But because the SCA, especially in the Pacific Northwest, where we do a lot of Norse culture and Viking era culture, might seem like there's a certain amount of dog whistle signs to people that are interested in such things, that we would be welcoming of their viewpoints. If I meet somebody and I'm like, you seem awfully clean cut for this game, or you seem awfully shaved head and tattoo wearing for this game, like there's tells, and I do dive in and I talk really openly. I'm like, oh, we're this and we're this, and we really value inclusivity, and we're really trying hard to make sure that communities of color who may not feel welcome, that there's always the opportunity for them to join and feel welcome, and make this a safe place for them, and that LGBTQ people feel like this is safe and inclusive. I just make sure that we really state that. And so if you are a newcomer and I said those things to you, it's because you just, maybe needed to wear a rainbow patch on your jacket or something. So I apologize.
And for anybody that may have been watching there, I made a face, and that's because I am a bald white guy with tattoos.
Yeah.
And so, but it doesn't bother me if people look into that stuff.
But I'm
just saying
bet that if we were like setting up, or you were taking off your armor and had your tunic off, if I'm staring at your tattoos, there's a reason. I am looking for any sign of anything where I'm like, I know what that is. I need to ask this person questions, because I don't think that that's okay. And it's not, I'm not the gatekeeper of these things. I'm just going to dive in and figure out if this person really understands what the SCA is about, or at least the way I think the SCA should be. And again, social capital to burn, my SCA is inclusive. So if that's not your SCA and you want to fight about it, please come talk to me. I'm happy to fight about that.
Well, and Joel, as you'll see in a moment in my slides, my husband and partner in all things SCA is also a bald white guy who, while he does not have tattoos, wears a Thor's hammer a lot. And he is one of the deeply inclusive men who takes that sort of thing deeply seriously. And while we always want to make sure newcomers are welcome, we do also ask those questions. In my professional life, I teach on diversity, equity, inclusivity. And so I'm always watching for those signs because I want to make sure that anybody who actually is wholeheartedly in love with the SCA and is there to play with everyone, that they feel 100% the welcome they should. And I want to make sure that anybody who actually has an agenda that is racist or sexist or in any way prejudicial, that they know that we're not their place. And I'm okay with that. The SCA doesn't need to be home for everyone. And I know not everyone will like that, but that's something that my husband and I in particular, especially in our encampment, take very seriously. People who say things that are not cool get told not to come back. And I agree with Dagmar. I think there's a time when, especially when you have that social currency, I think it's important to actually use that. It's just the same as, anyone of either privilege or fame, when you need to use that currency to affect change because we can. And so absolutely agree with you, Dagmar. But also, like you said, Joel, let's make sure that people who have stars in their eyes and genuinely want to play the game at that richness, that they have a warm welcome and that we're not pre-poisoning the well for them. You know what I mean? And I do see people who do that where they're like, oh, well, you can't do that, or that their answers are no and can't. And I'm a big believer that to be really careful with no.
I just tell them it's a fancy dress cocktail party in a cow pasture. That is my refrain.
And
anybody who tells you differently is not making the rules.
Agreed.
Sometimes it's a cornfield. Let's be real. It's okay.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Right.
There's a really good chance in Untier, your tent is going to have sopping wet dead animals under it when you wake up in the morning because of all the rain. So let's be real here. What are we doing? We're not,
Yeah.
you're taking it too seriously. Come on. So anyway, Joel, back to our questions.
Back to questions now, because I have a feeling we could both stand on this. So we could all stand on that soapbox very well and get some good information out, but maybe not what we're going for immediately.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
What would you've been able to have a couple reigns now in two different kingdoms, technically. What would current you go back and tell pre-first reign you? Or basically, what advice would you give to a consort that maybe hasn't had a chance to step up to the big throne yet?
I think there's two pieces of advice. One is a piece of advice I was given that I actually listened to, which is good. And another is one I had to, after a couple of reigns, sort of work my way towards. And it's actually something that I think I've most fully embraced with my husband, reigning with him. So the first piece of advice was that you can never possibly say thank you too much. Like, it's not possible to thank too much, to thank often, to thank richly, to thank everyone involved, because I think we are very often, we think, it's going to be too much. I don't think anybody's ever said, oh, I wish they would just stop thanking me, right? But I think there's a lot of wounds that are caused by people not being gracious enough. And so I was told, if in doubt, even if you think you thank someone already, thank them again, and come prepared with symbols of thanks. So I was told to have small, easily carryable gifts with me to give to people. So I started wearing a bunch of inexpensive rings so that I could have that largesse. So I could give somebody something from my person. And it was a piece of advice I was given in my first reign. And I love that because it allows, I think, to make people feel appreciated. And I think one of the biggest things that kills us in the SCA is we have a lot of people who work very, very hard, who very often they hear thanks when they get that first award. But I mean, honestly, once you hit a certain point in your SCA career, there are a few awards left to receive. And I think that we remember to thank in that initial moment. We don't always continue that thanks. And so that was a piece of advice that I received in my very first reign. And I've continued it through all my reigns and as Baroness, and then as a royal peer. Mm-hmm. The other piece of advice that I had to grow towards, and certainly it was something that, like I said, my husband was a big part of me embracing, was the idea that as royalty, really investing and being present in everything, and that can be exhausting as royalty, but that means no matter how tired you are, the archers deserve to see you at the field and at least come by and celebrate their moment as much as the heavies and as much as the rapier fighters and as much as the artisans. And that maybe you can't spend a ton of time with everyone, but that those little moments, the people will see those, and people want to feel like their part of the game also matters. And when the royalty are selective in what they support. And I know we're human and we only have so much time, but when we support all the activities, then we truly create an inclusive space. And I've seen my husband, who is not anywhere near as much of an expert as me, run himself just to the point where he's asleep by 9 o'clock when all the fun's actually happening in the evening, because he wanted to be present at all those things. And that was something, I'd always done to some level. I mean, to the credit of my previous partner in the SCA, he did very similar things, but I think not to the same degree. And it's one of those things where we really embrace that idea of, it's one thing to say all these things matter, it's another thing to show it. And when the Crown takes the time to be present for these activities, we put truth to those words.
And you see when this doesn't happen, or when people feel disconnected from the Crown. There have been reigns where either I've served as retinue or when I was reigning, where you would approach a group or a branch or whatever it is about, hey, we want to come to your thing. And they're like, well, why? Or we don't really need the Crown here. And it's so sad when you see that, because it's not really a reflection on those individuals who are wearing the crowns. It's a reflection on the lack of continuity and sort of consistent respect, the mutual trust and respect that's built from that familiarity and from seeing a value in having a relationship with the Crown. So, especially a really big kingdom like Ontario, where we have lots of branches, there can be the sort of that disconnect that happens. And it's kind of like, well, it's not as much fun. I don't know. Having the Crown should be fun, but.
Absolutely. Well, and if we talk about fealty being a chain, I always have, thought of the fealty. Not everybody necessarily embraces it to the same degree, but I think it's still that fundamental. And feel that chain is forged by each interaction. And it's formed sometimes by the simplest of interactions. And so, when you make the time to stop by, I remember one of the big events we have up here is called Quad War, and it's sort of the big war in Avacal, and all of the different groups have their encampments, and it's on this big, wonderful piece of property that is owned by Ascadian, which is pretty super cool because we have a castle there. And if you ever get a chance, it's really, really beautiful. And we would walk around and try to go by and say hello, even if it's just a greet, to everybody on site. And it was, and I've had people now, and we reigned in 16. I've had people since say, that made me feel seen in a way that I hadn't experienced. And that was great advice that I'm really glad I embraced. And it's something that I think when we're talking about building a space where people feel included, those small gestures have a lot more power than I think a lot of royalty expect.
I have to be really honest. I've always thought that Quad War was being fought between Transformers. And that's immediately what comes to mind when I think of it. And I don't know why, but I like to, because it's so far away. It's all the way up there in Canadian land. And there's giant Transformers in medieval armor fighting. And I don't think you should disabuse me of that. Oh
no, that's 100% what we do every day for 4 days. Absolutely, all day.
I'm coming.
It's actually called Quad War because it traditionally was a war between the 3 baronies and then the principality. So it used to be that that was the 4 sides of the army, and which makes sense. But it's a funny title now. It's the same as like Raptor War. I heard the comment when you were talking to who was it you just interviewed?
Portland.
Yes, Cortland. That's who it was. Sorry, I've watched a few videos about Raptor War and asking where that came from, and I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Because Quad War probably sounds completely strange too. So thank you. That's funny. But anyways, does that answer the question?
Yeah, totally. Now,
great answer. And it's also leads well to our next question, because it's about your experiences being part of a kingdom as it's formed, which is a really unusual experience. Like that doesn't happen very often, right? That you get to be part of something from the ground up. And I would love to hear about your favorite customs and traditions that have been built in Avacal that really are meaningful to you, as they pertain perhaps to the roles that you've had as Baroness and as royalty, but also maybe talk a little bit about how Avacal, what you've done that to set yourself apart from Ontir as your parent kingdom, because of course there's always things that you do to distinguish yourselves, right?
Mhm. So, I think that this is one of those things that is, I guess, speaks to our readiness to be our own kingdom. Is that, anyone who had come and visited us in the last, I would say, 5-6 years before we became a kingdom, regularly commented that it was very different than Ontir. And so I think we had very much evolved our own culture. I mean, we saw the crown fairly rarely. I mean, it would happen maybe once a year. And a few people like myself, travel down a lot, but a lot of times, most Avacalians heard about Ontir as opposed to experienced it. And we had in many ways already created our own culture by the time we became our own kingdom. And I think that is in some ways why it's actually been quite successful. We've always had a little bit more of that sort of small town feel. And one of the things that Avacal has always made important, and the more I travel, the more I see that it is a little bit of an unusual thing, is because we are so far apart, and a lot of people don't know the geography of our area. We're basically the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan with a little tiny wedge of we have traditionally had a little tiny wedge of BC. We don't now.
You're up against also the issue that most Americans don't know anything about Canada.
Yes,
so you might need to explain what a province is. It's
so
like a state, you guys.
Yeah, it's like a state, but like
bigger.
Bigger.
Well, like Texas?
So our closest barony from us is 3 hours south of us. And then the next closest barony is 5. And then the groups from there, now we do have one group that's like an hour and a half from us, but the rest of the groups are 5, 6, and 8 away. Like we're very far apart. And so we almost never have events on the same weekend because it's a terrible idea. We're not a big enough population for two groups to be sort of competing against each other. So we've had it in Avacal law for a really long time that we don't have events on the same weekend. And then because we're trying to draw from all our groups, like from my branch, Borealis has an event. We really want people to come from everywhere in the kingdom because if we're going to get more than 50 people, Borealis is quite big, but you know what I mean. If we're going to get a considerable population, we need to draw from everywhere. So what Avacal has always done is there is something for everyone. So we almost always will have an archery aspect, and in the wintertime, it's usually in a range so it's not necessarily at the event, but it's connected to the event. There's almost always heavy combat and rapier combat and arts and sciences, and there's almost always classes. And then there's usually youth activities at almost every event. We sort of do a little bit of everything. So there's a reason for everyone to come.
We, in our second reign, came up to a cornet in Medicine Hat, which is just as remote as it sounds, you guys. Think of a place called Medicine Hat, and you're correct about where that place is. Like you fly into to Saskatoon, which is a real place, and then you drive from Saskatoon to Medicine Hat. And it was lovely, like everybody was lovely, but they legit negotiate their terrain by there's a grain silo and you turn right. Like that really happened, which was awesome. And the other thing I learned, and okay, granted, I live in the Seattle area, so maybe this is something that happens in the Midwest of America too, but we kind of were in the Midwest of Canada when we were out there, and there are advertisements on the hay bales in the fields, like big posters on the hay bale covers.
I mean, it makes sense to me, but
I was just like, I'm like, that's amazing. I've never seen that before. That's amazing. Like, but it was really cool. And it was also like, one thing I observed was that it seemed like a fairly conservative part of Canada. There were tells for that, but also Canada as a whole still had legalized same-sex marriage at that time. And in the United States, we were still fighting those fights. And I'm like, listen, if the bread belt of Canada, where they're obviously very conservative, if they can have same-sex marriage, why can't we? Okay, sorry, that was modern politics, but it was like, I remember being there, and this was a really big part of, I was like, this is really interesting. This is a part of our kingdom that, I didn't know a lot about. And going there and driving around and seeing the way people lived, and it was really important, you know. And it was also the last time that I went to a kingdom level or a principality level event like that, and we stayed in someone's house and not in a hotel. And that's also kind of a part of old school SCA that we don't do as much, right? But we had a lovely time and it was really special. And I, you know, in some ways it's the way the SCA was for a very long time before we got too big, the way Antir has gotten really, really big. So it was really, really cool. You know, it was really special. So we thoroughly enjoyed it. The kingdom or the principality event was entirely indoors, the fighting, it was winter. So, you know, that was really cool. It didn't put a damper on it. So anyway, sorry, this is an interview of you, but I just want to say it was really cool. And it was one of my favorite memories. So
thank you. Yeah. Well, and I think that that's a really great comment. I mean, we still do that thing where, oh, someone's looking for, does anyone have room to host people? Because you're traveling so far. Like if you're coming from Sigel-Hundas, which is Regina, Saskatchewan, and you're coming up to Edmonton, which is Borealis, where I live, that's an 8+ hour drive. So if you're factoring in that travel and then having to pay for a hotel, it becomes very expensive. So like we still regularly, if there's an event in our barony, we regularly will have a house full of people that we're hosting for that event. And so, yeah, I never thought about the fact that that's kind of old school SCA, but that is still a very big part of it. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that changes your culture. I noticed that the first time I went down to the West is people down there don't really camp together. At Avacal, we either camp together in the summertime because when it's nice enough to do stuff outdoors, we go nuts. And then when it's indoors, we have a lot of times we'll have in-hall camping where so people can save money by staying in the hall in the evening. So then it becomes a sort of indoor party for everybody who is sharing that space, or they're staying at all these different hosts. And there's people who regularly fill their houses full of, you know, people like ourselves who have quite a large house who regularly fill it up with people at an event. And so I think it changes the way you are connected, right? And because we have so few branches, relatively speaking, you kind of, like, I feel like generally speaking, people try to get along. You know, I had this comment one time where somebody said, well, I'm in Seattle, and if I don't get along with so-and-so, I just can play in another barony. Well, if I don't like anybody in my barony, like if I find that everybody in my barony is insufferable, I have to travel hours in order to go and do anything fun. And so I feel like it makes us a little bit more inclined, not entirely. I mean, we're still human. Like we still, even though we're Canadian, we still don't get along necessarily. But I feel like we mitigate that somewhat because we're going to be at events with those people. And so,
and if you find everybody insufferable, they all have you in common.
Really, that's also true.
You're probably the problem.
Yeah, very fair. But so I think that that's part of it. Is I think we already had our own culture, and we've kept, like, one of the fun things about this, and definitely this has been one of my really interesting things about the process, because of course I was the only active countess when the kingdom switched over. So I was the highest ranking peer that was living in the kingdom at that point in time. And then I was the first Duchess. And so I end up being sort of the, okay, Inga, what does Antir do? And I'm like, well, here's what, like, I'm like the library. And what was really neat is that we have gone through and picked and chosen the parts that we like we've kept the collar of steel for the swearing of fealty, right? We've kept a lot of the sort of verbiage in the ceremonial because honestly, Antir has gorgeous ceremonial. We've kept parts of Antir that we like, but we have definitely picked and chosen, right? And we had a lot of very cool culture of our own that we just then, I feel like instead of had to sort of make it fit with Antir, we then fully embraced. And so it probably doesn't feel that different to most of us because I feel we were moving here anyways by the time that it happened. But I think when other people come here, they're like, oh, okay, no, this is different than Antir. And it always kind of was, but now it's really evident. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that makes total sense, and that's awesome. I think, I mean, I started playing in kind of a geographically isolated area also, and I've lived in a few kingdoms that have been very stretched out between Outlands, Artemasia, and Alcalantir. They're all, just geographically huge, and so it's interesting to hear how that evolved and made it so as I don't know, what do you call it? The breaking up is like a natural thing, the graduation.
Birthing.
I think
birthing is good.
Yeah, a lot of people were really like a lot of people in Avacal were very happy. I'll be honest with you, and I was pretty transparent about this with my interview with Misty, with Rifkin rather. I was sad because I always played on tier, and I got both my peerages on tier and like my Laurel and my Pelican, and so I was sad. But and I've told the story before. When it was announced in court. To be completely transparent, I went up to my room because it happened to be one of our rare hotel events. And I had a great big blubbery girl cry in the shower because I was heartsick about it. But then, and again, with the excellent advice of my very wise husband, he came upstairs and said, you can't be absent for the celebration. You're too visible. You need to wipe away your tears, put on your pretty dress, and need to go downstairs and be happy about this because people will take their cues from you. Because like it or not, you're a visible peer. And he was right. And so we put on our best dresses and we went downstairs and we celebrated. And once I was past that initial moment of mourning, I was all in. And what I did is recognize what has always been true, which is being part of a big kingdom like that has definite challenges. And there were things that we could never do because Ontier didn't understand it. And we were able to make changes to our culture and to our rules and to things like our ABC, the Book of Combat. We were able to make changes that made sense for us. And so I think it was 100% the right choice. But I also think it's important to be transparent. I had a great big giant cry about it, and I'm deeply proud that we created this and getting to be the third queen of Avacal after having been princess twice, and like I said, I've been baroness twice. It was just such a huge honor. Really, really proud to have now what we've built at this time.
Well, I'm going to put some slides on so we can continue reveling in some of this. So here is a lovely picture of you, looking dapper in your armor. So you still fight?
Yes.
And that's your husband. And
yes.
You can't see it, but I'm picking his nose with my cursor right now. So
he will love that.
For posterity's sake, everybody should know that that's what I'm doing. So it's a great photo. And
you can totally see it, by the way.
Really?
Oh yeah, you can see your cursor.
Yay! But this is really what we're all here for.
Yeah, that's
a LARPing photo.
Yeah, I think I was a ranger. I'm not sure. That's a bedspread that died to make a really brilliant cloak.
No bedspread is safe to someone who's just started the SCA.
Nope. Yep.
That's awesome. So good. It's so good. I mean, there's so much about this. Like, it looks like something from American Horror Story, but also it's incredibly special. I love this photo.
The thing I love best about this picture is I've got my usual pretty big smile and I'm all like, ta-da, check me out. And if you look right behind me in the bushes, there's a person who's dead. And a car. In a car and a bunch of people wearing black cloaks predictably. So it's just it just is a hilarious picture to me. And I love this. I used to make so many costumes. I'd like the transition to making period costumes was actually pretty effortless for me because I already had been spending just an insane number of hours making things. The one picture I couldn't find a picture of for you is I one time made a costume to dress up like Mr. Toad. So we made giant foam frog heads and then frock coats. And me and my friend walked around and we were Mr. Toad and Frogella all for the entire event.
You need to find that and just share it with me just so I can guffaw. But also, you were clearly the LARPing hot chick. Let's be really honest about this. You were the LARPing hot chick.
Thank you.
All right. This is very cool too.
Yeah, I have this. So one of the ladies up in Avacal, Roxanne Delaroche, is an avid photographer. And so just by chance, she happened to catch her. This is me getting my AOA. And I mean, how often do you have pictures of those moments, right? So this is me, this is the August before I was made princess, or rather heir to the throne of the Principality of Avacal. So I received my AOA in August, and in November I was the heir to the coronet. So. And they're the worst pants. And so I clearly like stripy things. So this is, you can see the worst pants. Although it's funny because I'd only ever worn just awful pants and T-tunics because you know, it was comfortable, and, you know, I didn't really think anything of it. And then I was about to be princess. And so Erica, who's amazing, said to me, we got to make you something that looks at least vaguely Viking. So she made this outfit for me so that I would have something. And it's one of the first dresses I ever owned in the entire in the SCA. And I still own it. I'm actually really proud of it. But because she made it with great love. But I look at it now and it's like, it's just not, you know.
I have a striped dress that's not so very dissimilar from this, but it was made for the Northern California heat, because I was Princess of Sinagua and needed something in black and yellow. And it's a great dress, don't get me wrong, but I think maybe I could fit one of my legs in it now. That's really the...
Well, I have the reverse problem is this was sort of made, she wasn't really sure, you know, like it's tricky to do the sort of measuring. She did it long distance. So she made it quite big. So you can see it's actually quite cinched in. So I can still fit into it, but that is no statement on my size, because I assure you there is vastly more Inga now than there was in this picture. It's just the dress is a lot more forgiving.
So these dresses weren't really intended to be basically coat hardies without sleeves, the way a lot of us have been wearing them over the years. So, you know.
This was me at my very first Kingdom Arts and Sciences competition. I entered a period scroll, and I love this because, well, first of all, it's like literally the worst bangs on the history of the planet. And also it's the same dress because I was so proud of it. It was my best dress, right? I also, this is one of the very first things that I did where I really fell down the rabbit hole of making something truly period. I made my own ink. I used period pigments. I did it on vellum. Like, this is one of the things that kind of pushed me over that edge towards my laurel. So I also look so earnest. It just cracks me up. So
I love it. I know you look like you're not talking,
which is so rare. Yeah. I was so
I
nervous.
was gonna say, you look serious. The bangs make you look just super serious in this picture is what it is.
Studious.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite pictures that was taken during my reign in Antir. This was taken at Antir West War, and I apologize, I don't know the artist anymore that took it. But however, I never saw it in color, but in the gray tones is really gorgeous, and I'm super proud of it. So, and I was really proud to sit those thrones. Ruling Antir, that radically changed my understanding of the SCA. I think ruling it all changes what you see, and being Princess of Avacal, I'd been Princess of Avacal by this point twice. But being Queen of Antir changed my understanding of the SCA in a fundamental way, and was, I think, very much the start of the path that I'm on now. I love this. When I was Queen of Antir, I had said I wanted to do all the things, and this was one of my starts of doing that. When I had been Princess of Avacal, there had been a point where the things were not cool between the rapier fighters and the heavy fighters, and to kind of make a point of, well, you can't be awful to the rapier fighters because then you're being awful to the princess. I got authorized and started fighting with them, so that, because they kept doing things like putting them out in the parking lot instead of actually, you know, I don't know why. It's a long story. It happened a long time ago. I was back in like 2001. But I thought, well, if I decide to take the field, whenever they take the field, if somebody's being awful, then they're being awful to the cornet. And it turns out I actually quite like it. So, and so when I was Queen of Antir, a group of very diligent costumers made me this, plus actually has a gown piece that I can wear with it. So I could theoretically go from field to court. I never actually did because reasons. Sweaty mostly, because my gown might look great, but my head didn't look good. But it was one of the things that I was deeply proud of, taking the field with the rapier fighters of Antir, and I really enjoyed the relationship I had with that peerage, with the White Scarves at that time. So I'm just really proud of. Plus, I'm not rubbish at it, so that's kind of nice.
That is nice.
This is my step down for Baroness. So this is when I did 3 years as Baroness of Borealis, then I was Queen of Antir, and then 3 more years as Baroness of Borealis. For the record, if anybody's paying attention, don't do that. That we were so done by the end of this term going, I mean, it was a lot. And I think that would be hard on any relationship, but that was tough. But the reason I included this picture is this is me releasing my sergeants. And one of the things that had happened while I was Baroness is I'd helped rebuild the sergeantry in are in Avacal along with the other Baronesses, and I was deeply proud of it. So it was a very emotional moment. And, you know, I think of, you know, sometimes you start things and you hope it's going to go well. And so I'm really proud of the fact that our sergeantry still has a really strong presence in Avacal, but it had almost died by this point. And with the help of the sergeants, it's not like I did it all myself, but it was something that it was a big project for me as Baroness. And I never got to actually have the first testing. The first testing actually happened under the wonderful lady who followed me, Baroness de Vera. And so it was one of those things where I put all the work into creating it and was really proud that somebody else carried it on. But it was also a really emotional moment because we had worked so hard to build something strong. And again, something really inclusive. And that's been something that mattered to me for a long time.
And of course, for those from other kingdoms, we have strong baronies in this part of the known world, and that's not the truth everywhere. Not everywhere has baronies or active baronies, and we have sergeantry and the first sergeants. That is an Ontir tradition that came out of some of the early baronies in Ontir, and which is a legacy that it's nice that Avacal has continued that. It's such a good way to grow leadership in people. And also just, it's that idea that not everybody's contributions happen at a grand scale. Sometimes there's more intimate and personal service that happens I know there's lots of jokes that could be made about that, but very seriously, that relationship between a baroness and their sergeants can be very, very special, and can create lifelong friendships and connections. So it is very cool.
Yeah, I'm very proud. They still give me a gift every Yule, the sergeants of Borealis. It makes me it's very, very touching. And so that's why I included it. I thought that's a special shout out to that heritage. This is the day that my husband won for me. And it's called we call it Catacrown in Avacal, because what happened is there was the site that they booked had a giant tent caterpillar infestation.
Oh, no.
So it was the worst. Like, you'd be standing there and all of a sudden feel like, okay, that's it. It's climbing up my leg. We had to keep shaking out his helmet. The only fight he lost that day is because there was literally a caterpillar crawling inside of his helmet. And all of a sudden he just sort of went I'm not paying attention to the fight anymore. So it was really funny because he had been saying, he woke up that morning, he goes, today is not going to be, this is a bad day to win. And then he went out and he was so masterful. And I mean, I obviously love him dearly and he's my heart. But the way he fought that day, it still chokes me up because he just had decided to, and he said it wasn't about winning the day. He just wanted to be his best self in each fight for me. And he's, anybody who spot him, he's a really honorable fighter, and he's, he takes it very seriously, and he'd rather die and never win again than win poorly. And I was just so proud of that day. And what's really funny in this moment is, you can't see, is he kisses me and then he says, "I'm sorry," because we had just finished paying off some debt that we had taken on for repairs on the house. And he knew then we were just about to spend a bunch of money again. He goes, "I'm sorry, we were so close."
Now,
okay.
Be honest, Inga, did he say "I'm sorry" or did he say "I'm sorry"?
He's actually got a pretty good Canadian sorry. For those who don't know, my husband's actually American. He's an Ontarian that I imported for my own happiness. But this is a really special moment. Him winning for us was really wonderful, and I have to say, reigning with him as the third reign in Avacal was deeply special. And anyways.
Well, also that saying sorry can also mean not sorry. So
Yes.
he may have been saying it, but what he was really saying was a myriad of things. Fuck you. Bad. Live with it. I mean, there's so many options. And also, I would like to point out that he does realize that just because he lives as far north as he does doesn't mean he can't use sunblock or shouldn't use sunblock. He really should. So hopefully with sunburn this particular day. So
that's awesome. Oh, this is a really special picture. So 50 year, the big celebration. Our crown was very excited to go. And I was actually in charge of, and for anyone who went there, there was a huge historical installation. Basically, one huge building was just the histories of each kingdom, and each kingdom put in a great big display to sort of speak to their different histories. And I had been asked to take on that project. So I was the historian. I was going to go to 50 year, and then we won. And so 3 weeks after us winning was 50 year. And as it turned out, our current crown couldn't attend. So I had the enormous honor. You can see I'm in the yellow dress right at the very end. I had the enormous honor of being part of that ceremony at 50 year to represent the kingdom. And it was so cool. And I'm Dagmar could speak this, I'm very rarely nervous. I'm deeply comfortable around even total strangers. And I was actually quite nervous about this and a little shaky because the enormity of being part of this, because a bunch of the founders were there, and it was so special. And to get to be part of that opening ceremony, that is something I'll treasure always. And this is my lovely husband making me queen of Avacal with the amazing crowns made by Vryn and Ugo. Ooh, they're fancy. So very wonderful.
Real question, how heavy are those things?
They are actually not very heavy at all. The silver is all repoussé from the back, and a lot of the pieces are cast. They were designed, I mean, it's not like they don't weigh anything, but they actually weigh less than the crowns or the coronets that Avacal used to have. And I can tell you definitively, they weigh vastly less than the giant monstrosity weight that Antir has. Like the Antir crowns are iconic and gorgeous, but they weigh the mass of a small sun. Like they are, what Dagmar can tell you. I mean, they will literally give you headaches. They are the most incredibly heavy thing ever. And I don't mean that metaphorically, like quite literally, they weigh.
They'll leave a divot in your forehead, but we in our last reign had caps made of some wonderful people like Mistress Ellen out in Dragon's Lair made us these little caps with ridges on them, like little puffy ridge, very discreet. And oh my gosh, what a difference those made. I highly recommend distributing the weight of anything that you're wearing. But those were really good. But yeah, they do cause a headache. But when you're wearing them, it's not like you're going to go, hey, I'm the royalty and my crown weighs too much. It's like literal metaphor, like the burden of the crown sitting on your head. You don't complain about it, but you do find that people like to take them off a lot, and that's why. So.
I was just curious because I've seen those ones. I've seen, and like Ugo's work is always beautiful, but it just looks heavy.
Well, what you don't know is that these are lined with cheese, and so as the day goes on, you can eat the cheese and then you refill it the next day. So you have snacks in your crown throughout the day.
So I have a funny story about that. So my lovely husband, as you can see, is bald. And so the crown does actually quite seal to your head. Well, I don't know if you can really tell from this picture, it was blazing hot this day. Like it was super massively ridiculous hot. We had to get a mantle made for him in linen because we knew if we put him in wool, he would probably actually catch fire. And so it was a hot day. And there's a part in the day where we're doing the oaths and we take off the crowns for, you're taking off the crowns and you're putting them, and of course it's sweaty. And so there's one point where we're just doing people swearing on our hands and he leans forward and the sweat that accumulated in the band poured out and got on the lady in front of him that he was taking the oaths from, and he because he's a pretty clever guy, he made a comment something along like, and so I bless you or something like that, and then she laughed and then it was fine. But I know later he was like, oh man, because he just had a little lake of awesome going around there, but he had a little lake inside there. So yeah, tricky. There's us looking resplendent. So the cool thing about this, and this is why I include it, not only just because it's a really cool picture, but we won the first weekend of June. And because they were changing the calendar, we stepped up the first weekend of July. So we had 4 weeks. And in that, I went to 50 year for 4 days because I'd already booked that trip. Our family, our household, and then other great artisans in Avacal made these outfits in 4 weeks.
Nice. Wow. Yeah. Very nice.
That's impressive.
And this is us at Pentic. Okay, so I've done a lot of very cool things in the SCA. Absolutely own that. But we got to be the very first king and queen of Avacal to be at Pentic. Cool. And that is, I will hold that like a treasure in my heart forever. It was so cool to take the field. And I think there was like 3 Avacalians there. Like, it was nobody could go. And like I said, we had just won. I mean, we won in June, we stepped up in July, and in August we went to Pennsic. Like there was no time. And it was so incredible because of course we're the last ones heralded in, so everyone's looking at us. And it was so amazing to attend Pennsic as the very first crown of a kingdom. Like that was so just so special, so incredibly special. And this is my husband. I'm the yellow pants and the red tabard, and then the swirly shield next to me. That's my lovely husband. So that's the pair of us taking the field with our army, going to war on Tyr in Tiri. So this was the and you can see the Tiri army is striding next to us with blue and white shields. And I have always taken the field as queen or princess, but that never loses its shininess, you know. And I know that this is probably something I'm sure, Joel, you can relate to. That moment when you're representing something greater than yourselves as a combatant is really special. And taking the field as a ruler is just one of the greatest joys I've ever had in the SCA. It really is. And this is me fighting at the same war. You can see my big goofy smile through the mask. The poofy pants don't fit me anymore, so I'm wearing a purple dress. But that's me in the purple dress running around like a fool with the Avacalians, murdering everyone. It's amazing, and I love it. And this I've included because it's one of the few pictures I have that I like of me wearing my ducal circlet. Now I don't actually own a ducal circlet, and when I was made a Duchess, I was given an incredible gift, Duchess Ludwiga, who was the queen who created the Principality of Avacal. So she was queen when that was birthed. She gave me her ducal circlet to use in my ceremony to be made a Duchess. And then because she was at that time Baroness of Stromgard, allowed me to wear it for several years. It actually just recently went back to her, let me wear it for several years, because she just felt it was a beautiful connection to her. And the pictures of my being made a Duchess are not particularly pretty because I am bawling, because just the enormity of having someone of that kind of, I mean, she's a lion and she's just an epic human being. And so getting to wear her ducal circlet was just an incredible honor. Plus it's really pretty. So I included this for that sort of harkens back to my comment about being careful about how you interact with new people. I love kids. You know, I'm very proudly a stepmom, but I love children in general. And I had a moment not long after I first became a squire where I recognized how much little girls loved seeing me fight. And in recognizing that representation. So somebody captured this, and it's me, and I won't mention the little girl for privacy, but this little girl came up and wanted to inspect my armor and talk to me all about it, and she was just mad for it. And it happens to me fairly often, but this is one of the few pictures I have of it happening. And I think, you know, when we easily remember how we support those around us who aspire to peerages, I think it is easy to forget how we impact the youth in our game. And that we're meant to make space for families, and that's how our game has longevity.
Great, that's a good point. There you
go. Yeah. This is me holding up Kelwyn's scroll because she's awesome. But also I had realized I hadn't included anything that showed my art, and this is one of my most recent pieces, and this is her knighting scroll. So I was actually made a laurel for my Scrabble arts, and I realized I had not mentioned that yet.
I mean, it's just a small part of what you do.
Thanks.
It's a small thing, but because of all that you do. But you know, your art is amazing.
Thank you.
This is such a cute photo of you.
Thank you. So this is actually fun. So I've gotten into period cooking. It's not what I was laurel for at all. But in the past 5 or 6 years, I've really gotten into period cooking. It's a fun thing that can happen in our camp, and it fits in we have this big culture of hosting in our camp. And the best way to make sure people always feel welcome is to offer them food. So we cook over the fire and have food that can be sitting there over the fire for hours. So we can always offer people a little bit of a meal. And we do it through the night. And so it's a big part of the community that my husband and I have built, that Orange Baron and I I have built in the camp. And we were asked to go to a con. So this is actually a Comic-Con in Calgary, which is quite a large one. And they let us set up the SCA encampment. So we're there to basically demo it. And what we did is we set up, we cooked food, and then we gave away, and as long as we didn't charge, they'd let us do it. We gave away over 250 samples of food to people attending the con, because food connects with people in a way that words don't necessarily. And the amount of traction we got out of that con was brilliant, but it was so fun. I spent all day cooking with my husband, and he made ribs, and we made all sorts of amazing dishes. And we had a special dish that was carefully prepared, gluten-free, the whole works. And we just hosted basically everybody who walked by. And we were on the main road that sort of led into the entrance to the con. It was brilliant. And I really like the idea of having peers be present as part of the continuing growth of the game.
This is
just included, what's that?
This is a good picture because it has a dog in it.
It's exactly. I just included because it's me playing with a puppy, and that always wins. And I noticed you regularly ask puppies or kittens, and so here my statement is already very clear.
Okay, very good.
This is my amazing knight. This is, as many people know through her work with the two sisters, and also the Dukes and all of that. This is Sir Rifkin, and so the knight who has taken on the enormity that is me is Sir Rifkin. I'm deeply proud. She is. I saw her fighting when I was a brand new fighter at an on-tier tournament. This is way before she was knighted. She was Sorsha back then. And I saw her just beating the stuffing out of everyone, but in this masterful, thorough way. And it was just deeply inspiring. So long before I even ever actually met her, I didn't actually meet her for a couple of years after that. And long before I was her squire, she was like this person that I was just profoundly moved by her commitment and her integrity. And I have to say that there's many people that shape my game, but the integrity and just the wholeheartedness with which she embraces the game and embraces what's best in the game, right? She is about really making that space where people are at their best and expecting the best of them as well. And so she's been a huge part of who I am in the game. And so wanted to include an awesome picture of her. And I know she doesn't like pictures of herself, so I picked one with her helmet on.
Well, we made her a pelican, and we made you a pelican. So
yes,
there's kind of a pattern developing here. So that's pretty funny. But this is really where it's at.
and this is what comes of years of friendship.
I'm laughing so hard because of the comment on the last one. I don't like having the pictures with the helmet off.
There's a reason. This is the reason.
Well, to be honest, neither she or I particularly like having our picture taken, and so there's a lot of them where we're kind of playing the fool. And this is one of my absolute favorite. We've been fighting all day, so we are also gross. We're not just making faces, but it was brilliant. It was just I love her like. I love her like she's a part of my heart that lives outside of my body. So this is just so awesome. So. And this is, I'm in the red and yellow. That's me in armor. Next to me is Sir Otar, who was squire to my husband, who is next to him. I made Misty cry. Yay. And next to Otar is my lovely husband and his amazing helmet. There's people I know who know his helmet and don't know him. He has a super sexy helmet, but he's also just like an absolute death dealer. He's amazing. And then next to him, this is why I include this picture, is my best friend. And she is actually the person who got me out to my very first event. And we've been best friends since we were in university. She lives like 3 blocks from me. She is my friend in everything, but it's just awesome because I got into the SCA, and again, in typical me, I'm in like 1,010%. She still attends about as many events as she did the very first time. She is this exquisite embroiderer and does all these wonderful things. And when she comes out, her encampment is exquisite, but she comes to like 2 events a year. And she's, to me, this wonderful idea of balance, because I think sometimes we forget that we shouldn't be doing this at the cost of our lives, our real lives, and our relationships. And she has this wonderful balance. Like I'll say, there's an amazing event. She goes, yes, but I have these things. And I'm like, right. But
she didn't know you when you were horrifying the nuns.
What's that?
She didn't know you when you were horrifying the nuns.
That's a good. That's a good story. I can tell that one later if you like. Anyways, she's a wonder. I just love the role she plays in my SEA balance, because sometimes I'll talk to her and she goes, well, maybe you could just do a little bit less and that would be okay. And I'll be like, right. So she's also incredible. This is our encampment. We have an amazing household, and this is down south, down in Woodland, Washington. We actually have a pit house there, and our whole household, Vinling, get together. So this is all us. We stay there a whole week. It's called our vacation, our Viking vacation, and we basically do cool Viking stuff for a full week, and we cook and we hang out and we do crafts, and it's awesome. And so they're that kind of community is a big part of what keeps me in the game. And I know one of the things you've asked people is, what keeps them still in the game. And for me, it's that community. Everything else and the politics certainly can make it challenging, but the community is what keeps me.
So that we don't have to ask that question now. That's fine.
Well, and I was really impressed by y'all's sense of community at Estrella in 2018, because I was in Artesia obviously at that time, and we shared a tiny little postage stamp of Estrella together with y'all, and the community that y'all had was fantastic, and I really enjoyed being right next to Avacal's camp, because yeah, y'all were a lot of fun. You had a beautiful setup there. Everyone was super lovely. I met Corsac, who, he's all right, I guess.
Oh, I'm a huge fan. I love that guy to pieces. But thank you. Then you have an idea of what Avacal is all about, which is really nice. And this is our camp in Avacal. So it's actually on the Quad War site, and this is our personal camp there. And my husband is absolutely tireless in making amazing things. I'll say to him, you know what we need? And then he just goes and makes it. And it's like so awesome, because now I have this like gorgeous period kitchen space, and everything I could possibly need to do all of the lunatic things that I like to do. And there's my family. So that's my lovely stepson and my husband and I, and we're standing actually in front of the pit house. This is a few years ago, but it's one of my favorite pictures of the three of us. And it's so cool to be able to share it as a family. Our son plays a little less now because he's going to university. He's a very busy fellow. But that love of everything medieval is at the heart of our family. And it's pretty cool. We have a whole basement that's done up like a Viking pit house, because we're that really kind of insane about it. So it's really quite splendid and wonderful. Dorks. Yes. Like I said, as much of a fool as I was about LARPs, I am right in with the SCA. So.
And that's the last slide I have. You said you added some goofy ones, but I don't see them now. So.
Oh, maybe they didn't make it in. I thought I saved it.
That's right. We're running over anyway, so let's get going.
No worries. I think you only need to see so many pictures of me sticking out my tongue. It was just 4 more of those. So.
Oh, okay, good.
So you've given a few shout outs to some of the people that mean a lot to you in the SCA. Who was your first mentor, or who was the first person that you looked at when you joined the SCA that was like, yeah, that's who I want to be when I grow up?
That's a hard one to answer, because when I first started, we were all like, I basically belonged to a Merc household, and we didn't really, like, honestly, we showed up, we bought a whole bunch, drank probably too much beer, and then went home, right? And so when I first started, I don't think I really had that kind of connection, but I remember the first peer that really, really stood out to me, honestly, was Dak. So His Grace. I remember being at I don't know which Ontario event it was, but walking around the site, and we came past his encampment. And then in that flash of a moment, it was like I had stepped back in time, and his encampment was always meticulous. Like every implement, every object, anything that you could see or even see within his tent was meticulously Viking. And as someone who loved history as much as I did, I think it was the first time that I saw someone commit on that level. And he's also an amazing person and deeply inspiring on a bunch of levels. But when I saw that, I just went, it could be so much cooler. Like, we're doing it cool, but like at that point, honestly, no, I don't think I knew anybody that had a period tent, right? That wasn't the way we were playing, right? We were really playing with training wheels essentially. And seeing his encampment was just absolutely transformative. And it became one of those things where it's not like I went after it like it needed to happen today, but it was always in the back of my mind of, when I really get my when I have the time and I have the money to make that happen, that's what I want. And what I started to do was little things like, okay, I can't have everything, so maybe I'll have a cool cup, or I'll, you know, like, but little ways, because I saw that what was splendid about his space was built through the little things. And so that was really powerful. And then to find him to be such an incredibly, I mean, he's honestly one of the only peers I've ever been afraid of. And I'm not afraid of people, like, again, like Dagmar can attest, I'm just not. I'm one of those, like, as extroverted as they come. And he was one of my peer fears forever. He still makes me a little bit nervous, and I'm always glad when he remembers me and smiles and gives me a hug, because I'm still kind of like, you know, so I would say His Grace Dak.
That's really sweet. And I think he'd probably poo-poo that and be like, oh, whatever, you know, but he would do it very quietly because he's very Scandinavian. But that's lovely. And I totally agree. His everything he would touch would just be very meticulously prepared and set up. And it is like, you see somebody who's just got their shit together at that level, you know, it can be a little intimidating. It also occurs to me, though, in Ontario, for those who may not be from Ontario, there can be a really big gap between a period tent that's waterproof and a modern tent that's waterproof. And if you are trying to go from modern to period, you know, it can be tough, because we can have really severe rainfall at our events, especially our May crown is sometimes called May drown for a reason. And so, or even later in the year. And so I think sometimes bridging that gap can be really challenging for people to get from the modern sufficiently dry tent to a period sufficiently dry encampment.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that raises a great point. You know, when you're talking about making that transition, you know, depending on what weather you're dealing with, it can be quite easy if you're dealing with a very moderate climate. In Ontario and Avacal, even more so, the weather, I mean, like, we have to think about the fact that it's not impossible to have hail, right? So what you have to build isn't just, it needs to look period, it needs to actually be a functional outdoor dwelling. And so building for that is a different thing. And that's actually one of the things that, you know, I'm really proud of what my husband's done, because he's brought that aesthetic, because he learned from those, you know, icons in Ontario, and he's brought that aesthetic to Avacal. And one of the things he's done is try to encourage people, you know, how to do this. Okay, how can I manage it in a way that's, you know, manageable in terms of my skill, but also my cost, to make that happen and have it be functional, right? Have it survive the weather we get. So that's a really great point, because being period in our climates is not the same as being period in some other climates.
No, very much not. So.
No, I learned the value of wedge tents. That was my big learning experience there from the Gulf Wars, actually, that had the microburst come through, and it just dropped like 95% of everybody's tents there. That was my learning experience. Wedge tents, you know, that's where it's at for the weather.
Well, I mean, you only ever have to attend one Estrella where the weather's really awful to know who has got it covered. Because I remember being at one Estrella where the giant windstorms hit, and the only encampment that wasn't blown down was Ontario and Avacal, you know, and everybody else was trying to sort of figure it out. And I mean, there are probably weather camps that I could, but everywhere around us, it was like there was Ontario and Avacal, and then everything else was blown down. I'm like, yeah, because we know from bad weather. And so you just have to figure it out. But it does make that leap to being, you know, truly evoking that medieval feel a lot harder.
So we're running a little long, so I'm gonna jump one question, but I wanted to ask you, what is your bucket list SCA event? Like, if an event somewhere, anywhere in the world that you have to go to before your time is done?
You know, I would really love to go to an event like Cudgel War in Drachenwald. I'm a huge historian. As I said, we've traveled through Scandinavia several times. I would love to go and play Viking in Viking land. That would be just so incredibly cool. And then I think one of the things that I definitely want to do is I would love to go to Iceland, because my persona is actually Icelandic, and I would love to go to Iceland and pretend to be an Icelandic person in Iceland at one of their events. Like, I think that would just be I think that would be incredible. Because I've been to a lot of other brilliant events that are more conventional SCA events. I think for me, it's more location. I would like to portray my persona in the space my persona might have lived in. I think that would be extra delicious.
I've been trying a Double Wars 2022, y'all. Let's do it.
Nice.
Whatever I go to, I bring my oven so we can make nachos. So speaking to the earlier point about period encampments, that's fine. You guys do whatever you want. Do you? I will do nachos. I will have nachos and probably also pizza. And it's done in the safety of my own camp. Nobody has to look at it. But if you can't melt cheese at an event, I'm not gonna be available for that event.
Well, we've been working on how to do nachos in a cast iron pot so it doesn't look like nachos on the outside. We're quite committed because I want to be clear. We love doing the period thing, but we like if people set up next to us. We don't care. We just want people to have a good time, and we embrace that. So we're not one of those people that when people set up their pop tents next to it, are like, oh, it is the end of all things. No. We don't care. We just like hanging out.
A period tent. Don't get me wrong. I've bought a trailer. I have the whole thing, but there will be melted cheese in it. So and there'll be coffee, and that's just it. Like it's the coffee's really for other people though. Like I drink it, but that's for other people.
We have coffee in our camp too. I mean, we take period only so far. I don't run without caffeine either. That just doesn't happen. That's
very bad idea. Very bad.
No one likes it. Yeah.
So you spoke to the fact that what keeps you in the SCA are those magical moments when you sit with your folks in camp and can enjoy, really the promise of the SCA, which is that period experience, that magic that kind of takes you out of reality. But I do know that you have things that you strive for. So not just the achievement of those magical moments, but what else do you think is worth fighting for in the SCA? What's worth putting the work in for?
I think when I think about what do I want to work for that's for the SCA, one of the big things that I want to try and do, and I'm really committed to, is trying to bring some of the things I've learned through my work in DEI in my modern life and carry that into the SCA. I think that we have let ourselves think that we didn't need to worry about those issues. And I think that it's been a lovely lie we've told ourselves for a long time. But I think we're and especially with the pandemic, and this is one of those things, we have a chance to reinvent ourselves. We're kind of like that teenager that moves to another city and gets to be something new. We can come back as a space that values everyone and makes space for everyone, and but everyone who's respectful, right? Where we create spaces where people of any background or any gender expression or any any relationship form or of any background or at all, where they all can feel like this is their space. And I think especially when I think of some of the failings, honestly, that Canada has had in terms of our Indigenous population. I think of our failures in terms of, our people of color, our First Peoples, how we haven't really made great spaces for them, and that we have a chance to change that. And so one of the big things that I'm committed to that isn't about my own self is about trying to make the SCA actually be that better place. The modern world doesn't get it right, so we should be better, not worse. Certainly not as the same, right? So I think I really see this as a great opportunity for us to rebirth ourselves, and it certainly is something I feel like I've got some really good insight from having worked in this, and I'm on boards with the university that I'm with related to that. So I feel like I can bring some value to try and make that happen. So I'm quite committed.
I think it's really impressive, the thought that our I guess our peers and SCA friends in Canada, the thought that you're putting into the way that Indigenous perspectives should be included, and the thoughtfulness that's going behind that. Often in the SCA, you'll see people with a mindset of what can I do versus what should I do, or what's appropriate versus, well, the rules don't say that I can't do this. The rules the rules. It's like, it's not about the rules. It's about the nobility in your heart and what you know is the noble and the response that can reduce harm and promote the values that as a society we think are most important. And that doesn't mean getting to do something just because you can. It's should you be doing that? And often we lose sight of that in the SCA when we start rules lawyering things instead of looking at what the intent is behind the standards and the values that we have. So it is really impressive. And I know this is work that you live in your day-to-day life as well. You've done some really special work around homelessness as well. Yes. And recognizing those most vulnerable, not in the SCA as much as in the community around you. And I do really appreciate and laud you and your colleagues where you work at the university for doing that. It's really important. So thank you. And thank you for representing that on this interview. And in this series, you know, we know there's a lot of people who are using their privilege in ways, you know, really weaponizing it for good. And that's super important. So thank you for being a participant in that.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, especially coming from you, because I know how much this is important to you as well. You know, I have to say it's one of those things where I always feel, weight's maybe the wrong word, but awareness of my privilege. You know, I am a white person. I am able-bodied. I am well-educated. I came from good background. I mean, I have very few impediments to my success beyond my own choices, and I'm abundantly aware of how that has shaped what I have had as advantages, and also what I've been able to make of myself. I mean, it's not as though it was given to me, but it still changes the setting I'm playing this game on. And I try to be abundantly aware of that also in the SCA, and try to use you know, whatever I can to try and make sure that that I'm acknowledging other people's different experience and making space for them. So, you know, I'm not saying I always get it right by any stretch. And I recognize that it can be really perilous as you know, sort of that worrying about becoming the white savior, right? It's a really common thing. And I talk about it a lot in one of my lectures, but, you know, I think if we're cognizant of using it for the right reasons and not just for our own self edification, then I think that's work worth doing, and I think that's the best I can do. So,
and none of us will get right. Like it's going to be impossible. Robin DeAngelo is a professor at the University of Washington, and she writes on and lectures and teaches on white fragility. So for anyone listening who's interested, that is something that you could pay attention to and look at how white fragility contributes to our issues in the SCA. You know, the defensiveness and the sort of lack of insight and introspection that we all tend towards because it's more comfortable. But change and progress is rarely comfortable, especially those of us who have the space and the bandwidth to be uncomfortable. We should be doing that.
And, you know, that's one thing that, like, I love so much about, you know, because we joke every week, Dag, about, you know, the abuse that you throw at me, but like, but becoming your friend, becoming the friend, and just having the friends that I do that have helped me open up my own eyes on stupid things. It really does mean a lot. And when I say stupid things, I'm not saying this, I'm saying how my own approach was to major issues, because it's a very serious thing. And, you know, I say it every week, you know, inclusivity and the love and generosity is what's going to keep the SCA alive. And that's what makes it home. And so when you have people that are brave enough to step up to that, and even if it's, you know, a friend or someone that you know, thought knew better, that's what keeps the SCA alive. And that's what keeps it open to everybody. So there, threw that in there. Dag, I secretly like you.
We're not judged by how faultless we are. We're judged, and we should judge ourselves by how we respond when we know better. When you know better, do better. And that goes for every single one of us. Every one of us make mistakes almost daily, or do things that when we know better, we cringe at. And all of us do it. We're just doing it more publicly than the rest of us. So, you know, just
I have like a 15-year period of my life that I cringe at. So
we all
consider
We all
I'm
do.
only 35 though, so that's a pretty large percentage of my time, but I'm getting there.
Not at all.
That's one of the things I think is really important, is to acknowledge that you don't necessarily get it right. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Part of the reason why I feel that weight is because I grew up in Northern Alberta in pretty much as conservative, red Neckerton as you could get. And we lived near a reservation, and I owned that I had unhealthy and very narrow views of that community. And it causes me deep embarrassment. I'm very ashamed of it. But when I knew better, I did better. And I constantly remind myself, I didn't used to get it right. And that means I need to give people grace to learn better. So when people do it wrong, you give them a chance to be better. You don't damn them in that moment. If they decide not to be better, now that's a different discussion, but you need to give people grace to be better. And I think that's one of the things, what Dagmar commented about, we feel uncomfortable, and how do we react? Do we get, have that white fragility? And I think there's an analogy that and I can't recall who gave this to me, but it's not my own doing, so I just want to be clear about that, is they said, when you're being an athlete and something gets sore, it just means you need to work better in that area. When we have social interactions and we feel uncomfortable, we need to recognize that that's a sign we need to do something different. And instead of reacting as, I don't like this, so I need to shut it down, we need to learn to acknowledge it in the same way as now this is a chance to grow. And that is a hard discussion, but honestly, if you're not uncomfortable, you're probably not growing.
Yeah, it's a good point. I also want to say, though, just to take this in a totally different direction, that you do have impediments to developing. We share that impediment, and that is neither of us have been able to comfortably sleep on our stomachs for many, many decades due to the buoyant appendages that
Or
are
flotation devices.
and those are literal impediments to a lot of things, like clean shirts. I drop a lot of crumbs down there,
I knock things off of shelves all the time. Yes.
Inappropriate touching that I wasn't responsible for. It just happened because the front of me touched somebody, and I'm like, I'm very sorry. I did not intend to touch you with my front appendages. So, this is really an important thing to examine in ourselves, and probably other people are examining about us too. So.
It's a cross we bear.
Yeah. So we're going to move right on here. At the end of our interviews, we like to give away a virtual gift basket. And as you alluded to earlier, we fill this basket with whatever we want because it's virtual, and we are not obligated to actually give it to you in person because we're in the middle of a pandemic, which is, good for us because it makes for better theater. So we normally would find this out ahead of time, but I am going to just ask you, are you a dark or milk chocolate person?
Milk chocolate.
Milk chocolate. Okay, well, you're Canadian. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You guys, why be bitter unless you have to, right?
Yeah.
So red or white wine?
Actually, neither. I am a gin girl.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not really a wine drinker. Right. So gin. Okay, and then puppies. We got that already. So, So we're going to give you a basket full of like very bland, super digestible milk chocolate because we don't want to upset your Canadian tummy.
My delicate palate, yes.
Yeah, maybe it'll be like a Milka brand, like that German brand that's specifically designed for children.
I actually love that.
Which is fantastic. That's right. It's still good chocolate. It's still way better than anything we make in America. So we're going to give you gin, but what I am going to give you is a bottle of this Rogue gin called Spruce Gin. It's the only gin I'll drink. It is absolutely amazing. And it's made by Rogue, which is an Oregon company that mostly people know for their beer. But they make this spruce gin that is silky and botanical and lovely. It is the best, and it's hard to find. And if I could give you a bottle right now, I would. And we're not going to give you more puppies because, I've realized in the course of doing this that just giving somebody an animal that they didn't pick out themselves is kind of problematic. Instead, we're going to stick you in a tent with like 20 like 8-week-old golden retriever puppies. And we're going to invite maybe someone else, maybe your husband would be a better person to do this, to like chuck a bunch of puppy treats at you and just let these puppies have at you.
Yes.
And that sounds awesome. And I would totally do that too. But just a fuzzy pile of puppies. And, you know, you get first pick of the litter if you want a puppy, but otherwise they're going to go back with whoever is responsible for them.
I love that. That's perfect. Right. You could not have packed me a more perfect basket. Thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, I could put a lot of other stuff in it, like based on what I know about you, but I don't want to put that stuff like permanently on YouTube. So
thank you. Oh, so can I mention a little fact just about you and I real quick? And because I know Joel doesn't know this.
By all means.
This is so because I was going to tell the story of the first time you and I met, but maybe that's not okay for YouTube. But so this is neat. So when I was placed on Vigil for Laurel, Dagmar and her lovely partner Thorin placed me on Vigil, and I was elevated by Skeggy and Taja, who followed them. And then when I was placed on Vigil for Pelican, I was placed on Vigil by Skeggy and Taja and elevated by Thorin and Dagmar, who followed them.
That's right.
That's pretty unique.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's also being suggested that, gosh, maybe something in your basket would include like some custom carpets and curtains.
Some draperies.
Do you want me to tell the story?
Oh, I think we'll just let it hang there.
Oh man.
In the uncomfortable silence that
I'm not uncomfortable at all. Now I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm gonna text you after this. You know that, right?
I mean, it was Inga the Unfettered, so which to me always meant don't bother giving her a gift certificate to Victoria's Secret.
And on that note, y'all.
Oh.
Yeah, by the way, Inga, I think actually you were at Raptor War for Kellen's night.
Yes.
So you probably actually had some of my favorite gin because I was at that event also, and I brought a bottle of this like delicious oak barrel aged gin that made its way around during the ceremony. So we might have actually shared some mutual gin love there.
Well, excellent. Well,
just
cheers to that.
I'll cheers to that. All right. Well, thank you so much. This interview was a lot of fun. You know, I kind of screwed it up from the get-go there, but I had a lot of fun with this interview. I really look forward to being able to see you in person. I don't know if you're a hugger, but if you are, I want to give you a hug. I definitely want to fight you, both Rapier and Heavy. I like doing both. Your husband, who sounds like an amazing feller also, I want him to kill me plenty. But thank you so much for taking the time. We really did enjoy this. For everybody watching at home, thank you. We are going to be taking a little bit of a holiday break here. We'll be coming back on a new time, new day, but we are looking forward to it. Everyone, renew your membership. Stay safe. Wear your damn masks. We love you. We will all see you soon. Thank you for joining.
Safe, and if you can't be safe, sanitary. That's what I always say. So, especially right now during the pandemic, please wear your goddamn masks. Don't be a rebel. Be an altruistic rebel. Wear the mask even when other people say don't wear it. The reality is a lot of people are dying. A lot of people in the SCA are dying, and we don't want to lose any more of you. Please wear your masks. Please be safe. Please avoid gathering, and come join us on Zoom. This is working. I mean, think of all the things you get to do, like use a toilet that doesn't involve any blue liquid. You know, there's some benefits to doing this online. So, and thank you, Joel, for your patience tonight. Thank you, Inga, for being such a good sport. This has been thoroughly enjoyable. And when we come back after the new year, we'll likely be coming back on Monday evenings instead of Sundays. So do watch for that. And we should be lining up a whole new group of people. And thank
Duchess
you.
Alessandra of Meridia is actually our first January guest. So.
Hey,
very cool.
Or Atlantia, but ruled in you that stuff. All the same. Thank you so much, everybody. We love you. Stay safe out there. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.